At this very moment, the folks you are seeing on the TV are pleading for a miracle. A revolution is developing as a result of hunger, thirst, and other forms of civic resistance. In the middle of the 21st century, this is Tehran, the capital of a country that asserts that it is a nuclear power. The ancient metropolis is currently experiencing the most chaotic situation in its entire history. A number of cities, including Qom, Isfahan, and Mashhad, as well as Hamadan and Tehran, are declining. At the moment, the Khomeini dictatorship in Iran is in the midst of the most catastrophic civil unrest in the history of the world. Iran is home to millions of people who are not standing still. They have had enough of the political system. The regime was able to bring about its own demise due to its own incompetence. The thirst and hunger that it caused drove the people to insanity. Iran is in the process of transitioning from a nuclear power to a water beggar in the middle of the 21st century. Despite the fact that it poses a threat to the entire world with its missiles, the Iranian dictatorship is unable to supply even a single drop of water to its own people in the capital of Iran. Even more than that, it has begun pleading with its neighbors for water. Free bread is not being offered to anybody in a line. There are millions of Iranians who are squatting down on each other in order to obtain plastic water containers to carry home with them. They are holding cans in their hands. There is no water coming out of the taps. All that can be heard is the sound of air and hopelessness. It was at this precise moment that society began to crumble. Mehzad Pezeshkian, the president of Armenia, waved the white flag for this reason. On the front lines, Iranian soldiers are only receiving 20 rounds of ammo for every 2 fighters that they are fighting with. Neither the F-35s of Israel nor the aircraft carriers of the United States are the source of concern for the generals in Tehran. The straightforward liquid that flows from the tap, or more accurately, the liquid that no longer flows, is what terrifies them. It is water. As the fighting becomes more intense, the amount of strain that is being placed on the military system is increasing. I am appalled by the information contained in this study. Each of them will be scrutinized in turn. As a result of the serious disruptions that have occurred in the 20-round crisis logistical supply lines, several frontline troops are only receiving 20 rounds of ammunition for every 2 men. On the other hand, the paucity of ammo is just the beginning. It has been claimed that field troops in certain places are operating without access to dependable sources of drinking water or enough supply of food, with no food, water, or weapons in sight. The men of a million-strong army are being destroyed by hunger, dehydration, and a lack of ammunition on the 12th day of the conflict. The fight has been going on for 12 days. It is physically impossible for an army to sustain its devotion under these conditions. It is physically impossible. Iran and its military are currently dealing with the most serious water crisis in the history of modern times. At this moment, the water level in the dams that supply Tehran has dropped below the critical threshold of 6%. Take this into consideration. In the case that a war breaks out, the elite Revolutionary Guard Corps, which has 190,000 men, and the regular army, which has 350,000 soldiers, will require a great deal more than the ammunition that they carry with them, since they will be dispatched to the front lines. However, the Iranian military does not have sufficient water at its disposal, which means that it is currently facing a significant zero-day vulnerability. The next step is to put this water insolvency scenario into the context of a military combat scenario. Let's say that the situation becomes extremely serious and a heated conflict starts. How much water does a soldier require on a daily basis while they are moving around on the modern battlefield with 30 to 40 kilograms of equipment, coping with stress and expending physical effort? According to the regulations of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the temperature data of the Middle East, A soldier needs an average of 15 to 20 liters of water per day for the purposes of hydration, sanitation, food preparation, and the prevention of disease. Water is necessary not only for consumption, but also for the operation of cooling systems, the upkeep of vehicles, and the fulfillment of medical requirements. Please take into consideration Iran's Revolutionary Guard Force, which has 190,000 members, as well as the Artesh Regular Army, which has 350,000 members. It is more than 500,000 people working there. The amount of water that this enormous force needs on a daily basis can exceed millions of liters while they are engaged in combat. This water can be provided during times of peace from wells located within barracks or from the supply network of the city. However, during times of conflict, when power plants are destroyed, pumps are turned off, and dams are nearing their capacity. Where will you obtain this water war of attrition is the ideology that underpins Iran's military philosophy. To put it another way, it is designed to wear down the adversary over an extended period of time by strangling them in their own difficult terrain. In the event that a war breaks out and the electrical grid is hit by cyber assaults or missiles, what happens to the water supply in a country that is undergoing a water bankruptcy? Pumps come to a halt. The wells eventually stop working. It is necessary to put a stop to water treatment plants. To put it another way, Iran's current water supplies do not permit the country to maintain a war for an extended period of time. The Iranian military will be compelled to use thousands of tankers in order to bring water to front lines and sites that are currently devoid of water. Transporting water to a front that does not have water is one of the most challenging operations in the history of the world from a logistical standpoint. This increased the load of operations by a factor of 2 or even 3. In addition to the convoys of trucks delivering ammo and fuel, you will need to add thousands of water tankers. Tankers are the most vulnerable targets for drones and airstrikes, since they are the easiest, most strategic, slowest, and most vulnerable targets. Because of the destruction of a tanker, a battalion of soldiers will be prevented from performing their duties within the next 24 hours. Limits imposed by biology are unequivocal. Neither hunger nor thirst can be compared to them. Dehydration is something that the human body can only tolerate for a few days at a time. However, it loses its potency in combat within a matter of hours. If a pilot is dehydrated, their ability to concentrate, the ability of a radar operator to pay attention, or the physical endurance of an infantryman all begin to fail. Every single soldier, regardless of how dedicated they are or how well trained they are, is incapable of enduring dehydration for more than 3 days. After a period of 72 hours, the kidneys begin to fail, cognitive functions begin to deteriorate, and the army is rendered incapable of fighting. There is a possibility that the Iranian army will have to face the wrath of its own geography on its own territory. The targeting of these depleting dams and water infrastructure is an even more frightening scenario than the one described above. Dams are considered strategic assets when operational conditions are normal. Nevertheless, Iran's dams have turned into a problem in recent years. In the event that they are full and are struck, they will result in a catastrophic deluge. On the other hand, if, as is the case at the moment, the majority of them are either empty or full of silt, and if they are struck by a power loss or rendered inoperable, then even that last bit of dirty water will become unusable. A decrease in water levels has already resulted in a 50% reduction in Iran's hydroelectric generation. It is possible that the collapse of the energy grid will also result in the shutdown of water treatment plants in the case of a war. This indicates that citizens will experience thirst before the military do, and that enormous unrest will begin behind the front lines, which is to say in the cities. It is impossible for an army to fight on the front lines when it is accompanied by a population that is defiant and thirsty. When Abbas Ali Abadi, the Minister of Energy, made his appearance in front of the cameras on December 3rd, he was not actually offering an announcement regarding a new strategy. In other words, he was waving the white flag of surrender for the dictatorship. Through the statement that we would purchase water from our neighbors, the minister made an official admission of the heinous truth that had been concealed from the entire world for a number of years. For a regional powerhouse that boasted about its nuclear program and hypersonic missiles, this sentence was the equivalent of committing suicide from a diplomatic standpoint. The Tehran regime had been successful in enriching uranium, but they were unable to ensure that their citizens' glasses were filled. It was the address of the door at which Iran was pleading for water that was the most tragicomic and humiliating feature of the affair. In order to have access to the most fundamental source of sustaining life, the contemporary Iranian state was compelled to engage in negotiations with Afghanistan, which was dominated by the Taliban. Tehran's collapse and powerlessness in the regional hierarchy was most clearly illustrated by this position, which was the worst possible scenario. Perhaps the most significant danger that the regime is confronted with is not from the outside, but rather from within. Iranian officials are reportedly having discussions behind closed doors about the possibility of evacuating particular neighborhoods of Tehran, as reported by the Institute for the Study of War. If a city with a population of 15 million people is forced to evacuate because the water supply has run out, what does this mean? This would be a problem that has never been seen before in contemporary history, both in terms of logistics and humanitarian aid. How are you going to transport them? Other cities such as Isfahan, Yazd, and Kerman are already experiencing difficulties as a result of the drought. This circumstance contributes to the widespread belief among the populace that the regime is incapable of effectively managing the country. It is not the rockets that will wipe us off, according to the people. Rather, it is your incompetence. The water riots that started in Khuzestan province in recent years were truly a glimpse into the future we are about to see. People smashed water lines and stormed government buildings in an act of defiance. Revolutionary Guards, also known as the IRGC, will be faced with a terrible predicament in the event of a potential war. To begin, they are obligated to engage in combat with the adversary at the border. As a result of thirst, millions of Iranians are spilling out into the streets, and they need to exert control over this situation. When it comes to military strategy, the division of security forces is considered a nightmare scenario. You have the option of allocating your resources to either the foreign adversary or the internal rebellion. When the Iranian government continues to be unable to find a solution to the water situation, it is essentially detonating its own internal time bomb a little bit further with each passing day. The fragility of the system is demonstrated by the warnings issued by President Masoud Pezeshkian. However, there is no way out of this problem, mainly due to the fact that the solution requires significant changes, a total shift in agriculture policy, and the removal of some of those enormous dams. The interests of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, and the local aristocracy who generate money from water are against this. It would appear that the dictatorship is currently observing the order that it built in order to ensure its own survival, now bringing about its own demise. Establishing the appropriate vocabulary is the first step toward gaining an understanding of the situation in Iran. The calamity that Iran is going through cannot be adequately described by the word drought, which is something that we hear rather frequently in the media. A drought is a weather phenomenon that comes and goes. It comes to an end when the rains arrive. On the other hand, what Iran is going through is a structural and permanent breakdown, which is what experts and strategists refer to as a water bankruptcy. Iran is responsible for the extraction of about 63.8 billion cubic meters of groundwater on an annual basis, as stated in recent publications. published by Time magazine and the Institute for the Study of War International Studies. On the other hand, the amount of water that is supplied by nature to this region is only 45 billion cubic meters, and it can be replaced by precipitation in the form of rain and snow. This large gap is being attempted to be bridged by taking money away from the future of the country. To put it another way, over the course of the past 4 decades, Iran has exhausted aquifers and groundwater supplies that were formed with the passage of thousands of years. To use a military analogy, this situation is comparable to an army that has ran out of ammo and is consequently removing its own fortifications in order to use the stones as bullets. After everything is said and done, you are left with no ammo and no stronghold in which to seek refuge. Recent information from January 2026 sheds light on the seriousness of the problem. The situation in Tehran, which is the center of the regime and is home to more than 15 million people, is nothing short of terrible. Despite the fact that the average capacity of dams across the country is approximately 35%. It is estimated that 4 of the 5 primary dams that serve the city have capacity levels that range from 6 to 10%. Any volume that is less than 10% is typically referred to as dead volume in the field of hydrology. This indicates that water at this level is contaminated with silt and sediment, which renders it technically unsuitable and prohibitively expensive to filter. The government is attempting to buy time by shutting down schools and government buildings in the capital city and lowering the pressure of the water supply. However, satellite photographs do not tell lies. Images that were taken between September 2024 and 2026 make it very evident that enormous reservoirs like Latiyan and Karaj have now been transformed into dust bowls. It is the time that a state begins to lose its legitimacy that it is unable to turn on the faucets in its capital city no longer. This precipice is currently being approached by the Iranian dictatorship, which is walking right on the verge of it. When we hunt for the person or organization that is responsible for this predicament, we are taken aback to discover that it is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, often known as the IRGC, which asserts that it is the guardian of the nation. Because of the aggressive and uncontrolled construction of dams by Qatam al-Anbiya KOA, the engineering branch of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, RGC, the water issue has its origins not so much in climate change as it does in the construction of dams. Over the course of the past 3 decades, Iran has constructed more than 600 dams. With either no environmental impact reports or with phony reports, the vast majority of these dams were constructed with the intention of generating money for businesses that are associated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. The catastrophe that occurred at the Gotvan Dam is the most spectacular and heartbreaking illustration of these schemes. The gigantic dam that was built on the Karun River was built on top of the Gaksharan Formation, which is a huge salt dome. This was done in spite of all the warnings that were given by geologists and construction experts. What transpired was a total and utter catastrophe. As soon as the dam started to hold water, it began to dissolve the salt that was beneath it, and the salinity of the water that was contained within the reservoir was higher than that of salt water. Not only did this project, which cost billions of dollars, store water, but it also watered hundreds of thousands of acres of productive agricultural area downstream of the Karun River with salt water, so rendering the land unusable and causing millions of date palms to dry up. Such a situation is referred to as self-inflicted suicide by Iranian experts. However, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, has smothered its own land with concrete and poisoned it with salt, despite the fact that it professes to safeguard the country from external adversaries. If we were to refer to the current water crisis in Iran as a natural tragedy, we would be attempting to cover up these engineering crimes. Destruction of the environment is being done on purpose. The lack of available water has been the most potent catalyst for societal upheaval throughout the course of human history. People are able to survive without free will, but they are unable to survive without water. The drought upheavals that have occurred in recent years in the province of Khuzestan, in Iran, which is rich in oil but has a shortage of water, are a glimpse of what is to come. In addition to obstructing tankers and destroying pipelines, farmers are also setting fire to structures belonging to the local administration. A traditional responsibility of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, UNRGC, is to defend the regime from external dangers and political adversaries. How then can you put an end to the millions of people who are rising up because they are thirsty? There is no solution to the situation that involves opening fire on water protesters. The fury is simply fueled by it. The collapse of the home front will be complete when the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, UNRGC, is compelled to commit its resources and troops to the suppression of water uprisings within the country, rather than to the protection of its frontiers. Because of the redirection of the attention of the security forces and the reallocation of logistical resources to the protection of the country's internal security, Iran will be entirely defenseless against an invasion from the outside. If we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, the situation in Iran demonstrates how geopolitics is constantly shifting. It is possible to determine the power of a state by looking at its missiles, nuclear power facilities, and proxy troops. But ecology is the cornerstone upon which that state's continued existence is built. The case of Iran demonstrates that even the most powerful armies may be brought to their knees by ineffective government and war against the natural world itself. The metaphor of the sand building is an excellent fit for this situation. When viewed from the outside, Iran appears to be a fortress, with walls that are impenetrable and towers that are tall. On the other hand, sand serves as the basis for this structure. That is to say, it is composed of dirt that has been coated with salt and dried riverbeds. The sand breaks apart as the water level drops, and the castle eventually falls down due to the weight of its own structure. Because of sanctions, Iran's economy has been affected. Its infrastructure has been disrupted as a result of cyber attacks. However, the drought is causing Iran's state system to become physiologically bankrupt. The annals of history are replete with accounts of armies succumbing to thirst and civilizations being crushed by drought. It is impossible for the clerics in Tehran to bring back water by praying or chanting anti-American chants. The Revolutionary Guards have already been defeated in their conflict with the natural world. In addition, the consequences of this defeat will be significantly more conclusive and lasting than those of any military defeat. The question now is, what are your ideas on this subject? Does the crisis truly reach such a severe level? The findings of the climate scientist Nasser Karami demonstrate that the situation is not merely a crisis. Rather, it is an impossible from a mathematical standpoint. Karami screams out the harsh reality, asserting that Iran's current water resources are only capable of supporting a population of 50 million people at the very most. On the other hand, Iran's population is close to reaching 100 million people now. To put it another way, the dictatorship is attempting to maintain the lives of twice as many people as the location is capable of supporting by utilizing resources that have been depleted. Because this equation cannot be maintained, the state has been forced to make a decision that is both radical and humiliating. For the purpose of bridging the gap, the regime is transitioning to a mechanism known as virtual water import. To put it another way, this sophisticated word refers to the end of agricultural production. In an effort to save water and ensure that the people have access to food, the state has made the decision to freeze the fields. The self-sufficient country fairy tale that has been told to the people ever since the revolution of 1979 has come to an end as a result of this decision. The ideology of the resistance economy has been rendered obsolete, and food dependency has taken its place. All of Iran's food security is currently in the hands of suppliers from other countries. The reason for this is that a state that is forced to import water has in effect started to give up some of its sovereignty piece before peace. This marks the end of the self-sufficient country doctrine as it was previously practiced. Since the lake has evaporated, the people's worst dread has started to unfold. Every gust of wind caused by the remaining 10 billion tons of poisonous salt causes millions of individuals to have their lungs filled with the substance much like a salt tsunami. In both Tabriz and Urmia, the prevalence of respiratory disorders and cancer has skyrocketed. People are destined to spend their lives in a gas chamber that is not apparent to them. However, the horror film does not come to an end there. When there is no more water available, the law of the jungle will take effect. On the streets of Tehran, a water mafia has emerged and begun operating.